So what is the necessity for simplification? So what is simplification? Why do we have to do that? Okay. So in next semester, you will learn compiler design. Okay. So in compiler design or compilers, generally what they do is they'll have the parse trees generated. Okay. So they'll have the parse trees generated, and they already have a parse tree for. So compiler, what they'll do is they'll have a parse tree within, say for a programming language. Say for a programming language, it'll have its own parse tree, or for a HTML or whatever it is, they'll just have its own syntactical parse tree. And whatever input that you give will be compared with this parse tree for syntactical correctness. So this is what a compiler does. And what this compiler does is, it will try to, for the input to the compiler. So what, say for example, the task of a compiler, it tries to check if a string can be generated by a grammar or not. String can be, this is a task for the compiler, okay. It has to check if the string can be generated by a grammar or not. So this is the task to the compiler, okay. So what is a very basic way of doing it? Checking a string can be generated by a grammar or not. So let us consider, we'll go for the very simplest approach, a brute force approach. So what they'll do, they'll generate all possible strings of the grammar and check if the string is equal to that string. Okay. So consider grammar generates infinite strings. Okay. So the language is infinite. Consider this scenario. Language is infinite, and the string that you have is not part of language. Okay, so the language is infinite, and the string that you have given for checking is not part of language. So this comparison will never end. Okay, so this comparison is not going to end at all. So we cannot, when we are using a brute force approach, so we cannot use a brute force algorithm for this. Okay, so for this, your compiler has an algorithm called CYK algorithm that does this checking without a brute force. So this gets a context-free grammar as input. So your compiler algorithm gets a context-free grammar as input. Okay. So I'm just explaining why we have to do all these things. What is the purpose of doing this ambiguity conversion, ambiguity reduction, simplification, and all this stuff? That's because context-free grammar in its raw form cannot be fed into a compiler. The parser of a compiler or the checker of a compiler, the checking algorithms, we cannot directly parse it. It cannot directly work on the raw context-free grammar. So this algorithm that checks such conditions in the compiler gets a context-free grammar as input. And the format of context-free grammar should be, it should be unambiguous, it should be unambiguous, it should be simplified, it also should be normalized. So you can see the second unit structure is this. Okay, I think this will be the very first unit of your compiler design. So to all the algorithms that are going to pass and check the syntactic correctness in compilers, they'll get a context-free grammar as input. So the requirement is like the context-free grammar cannot be in a raw format. So it has to be unambiguous, it has to be simplified, it has to be normalized. Okay, so that is why we have worked on removing ambiguity from grammar. And this class we are going to do simplification, and next class we will do Chomsky normal form and Lee normal form. So these both we'll do next class. So this class we are going to see simplification. So why do we do this? We are editing our grammar so that it is apt for usage by a compiler or higher elements. Okay. So we are going to do the simplification. That's the purpose of why we are doing all these things. And simplification, we have three types of simplification: removing null productions, removing unit productions, and removing useless symbols. There are three types of. Okay, so these are productions, null productions and unit productions. We have to remove null productions, we have to remove unit productions, and we have to remove useless symbols also. So these are the three ways in which we have to simplify. We have to simplify a grammar. Okay, so why do we simplify a grammar? Only when we simplify, we can use it. Only when we simplify, normalize a grammar, it is usable. Grammar in its raw form, it's not usable.